Welcome to This Week in Impact, where ImpactAlpha editor David Bank and I break down some of the most interesting impact investing stories of the week. I'm Brian Walsh. It's Thursday, June 13th. Today we'll discuss the ESG backlash continues through congressional hearings and shareholder votes at Tesla, women's growing economic power in Latin America, and Ava Duverney flips the script on Hollywood funding films with impact. That's all coming up on This Week in Impact. Hi, David.
Hey, Brian, how are you?
Now, you were on assignment last week, so we had the always insightful Jessica Pothering step in, but where were you?
I went out to the Sorensen Impact Summit in the very hardship assignment of Park City, Utah.
What were the big takeaways there?
Well, folks, it relates, I think, to what we're going to talk about a little bit. It was basically, let's go on offense and make the case and build the narrative for the kind of positive changes that are possible from all this impact and sustainable finance that we've been talking about.
Well, it was indeed a big week for people who aren't big fans of ESG, so let's get into it. Yesterday, the Republican-controlled Antitrust Subcommittee of the House Judiciary Committee held a hearing on what they call the climate cartel. And as we record today, Tesla is holding its shareholder meeting where Elon Musk is expected to win two resolutions, one approving his $56 billion pay package that a Delaware court had previously struck down, and the other to move Tesla's incorporation to Texas so we won't have to listen to Delaware courts in the future. So, David, let's start with the so-called climate cartel, which, by the way, is a great band name. What are the alleged antitrust claims here?
Well, first, is it just me, or is everything lawsuits and hearings and processes now? We seem to be enmeshed in a kind of a legalistic tit for tat. But at the Judiciary Committee hearing, the claim was that the folks who are kind of organizing investors and by extension companies around climate goals and climate commitments have formed a climate cartel, or in other references, I think the report called it the decarbonization collusion. And the notion is that by working together, and they didn't even work that closely together, but by working towards a common goal of getting companies to adopt and implement decarbonization and so-called net zero plans, that they were harming consumers, driving up prices, and that this was sort of anti-competitive. And so they hauled them all up to Capitol Hill there, including, CalPERS, the big pension fund, and Ceres, which is a nonprofit that organized the Climate Action 100 Plus effort, which was a big focus of the hearing, and then Arjuna Capital, which is a sort of more boutique and sort of shareholder activist in the sort of environmental activist context out of Boston.
Well, to hear what the Republican majority was claiming in these hearings, let's listen to Kentucky Congressman Thomas Massie, who chaired the hearings, and here's how he laid out the claim of the climate cartel.
First, the climate cartel leverages its investment holdings to demand meetings with corporate management. If corporations refuse to cave, the climate cartel then escalates to filing shareholder resolutions, demanding that companies take action. Groups like Climate Action 100 Plus then, quote, flag these resolutions, drawing greater attention to them and making them even more effective. If companies still fail to bow to its demands, the climate cartel then seeks to replace members of their boards of directors. Notably, the climate cartel did so at ExxonMobil in 2021, replacing 3 directors with members of its own choosing.
So, David, that sounds like a pretty good playbook.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's not wrong, actually. But what's kind of interesting is, none of that, I don't want to be too flip about it. None of that amounts to collusion. That is, by the lights of the investors, the way they are tackling, risks that come from climate, the way they are looking at their role as fiduciaries and as shareholders and exercising their rights in that regard. So it's interesting which foot the shoe is on, because there is quite a coordinated attack on these kind of ESG and climate collaborations. So I don't know where the coordination is coming in, but all of this is, of a piece, with these House Judiciary Committees, a lot of the stuff that we've reported on and talked about on this podcast at state legislative levels, and then a whole raft of lawsuits as well. So there's, at the very least, coordination on both sides.
Yeah, it seems like ESG has just become the latest proxy battle in the broader culture wars. And speaking of ESG, we have the governance vote today at Tesla, where Elon Musk has claimed victory ahead of the votes being officially tallied, but he's claimed victory on his two resolutions. Can you talk us through what's going on at Tesla and that shareholder engagement?
Well, you're right. It's probably the G for governance in ESG, which some people think is the most important of the three, in the sense that it's the actual oversight. And here, what we had was a pay package that was negotiated back in 2018. That because of the way Tesla's shares have gone up, was going to be worth $56 billion in compensation to Elon Musk. And it got thrown out by a judge back in January, I believe, said it was a breach of fiduciary duty to pay anybody that much. And then in order for it to be to go forward, Tesla decided to put it to a vote of the shareholders again and get sort of the seal of approval from the shareholder democracy, which they appear to have gotten. So it's kind of was, we said in the brief, a kind of flexing of billionaire brawn, to be alliterative, that Elon Musk has delivered a big win for Tesla shareholders. It's down a little bit this year, which is another question mark over why you should pay a guy whose stock has declined by 29% this year, partly of his own doing, partly competition and other things. But be that as it may, the shareholders are loving on Elon, and he kind of gets not only the money but a bigger chunk of control of the company, and also just the kind of brushback of the critics and say like he's still in charge.
Right, indeed. I mean, and the reason why his ownership stake in the company was depleted was because he sold so many shares in order to finance his takeover of Twitter, which he has now renamed X.
And this kind of tops him back up to where he was, I think, or even a little.
Tops him up, and he wanted to be at 25% ownership stake,
which is effective control. So essentially, it was saying, I'm in charge, and nobody should question me, or you won't get the benefit of my presence and brilliance in running Tesla. And it's interesting because he has come out now, in addition to sort of other controversial things he might have tweeted or X'd, but as a pretty strong critic of ESG. So you can see why. But he's in favor of impact, and arguably, Tesla has had a huge impact in kind of driving the auto industry towards electrification. So it's another example of kind of some of the cross currents or definitional riddles or pretzels that we can get ourselves tied in with between ESG and impact. And but this has not been a great week for ESG.
All right, well, let's take a quick break there. When we come back, in Latin America, how investors see economic opportunities through a gender lens.
I'm Eric Carmen Gonzalez, ImpactAlpha's Director of Subscription Growth. Ever feel like there's so much happening it's hard to keep up? We hear you. That's why we created ImpactAlpha Latin America, a monthly newsletter for impact investors who want to keep their eye on trends and investments happening in Latin America and the Caribbean. Follow the money and connect with agents of impact powering Latin America's impact economy. Visit our Instagram page @ImpactAlpha and click on the link in our bio to sign up.
Our own Dennis Price was recently in Buenos Aires for the Gender Lens Investing, or GLE Forum, LatAm. I understand it was a big crowd, David.
Yeah, well, you wouldn't necessarily think that there were 1,200 fans of Gender Lens Investing in Buenos Aires, but there they were at this forum. Dennis, I will say, has done a stand-up job of getting our Latin America edition off the ground, and I think we just put out the fourth one last week. And Gender Lens has become a big regional focus there, and so there's funds growing up, there's initiatives at the sort of multilateral, development bank level, and the draft of super interesting companies and ventures.
So, can you dig into some of the fund managers that are emerging in this space?
Well, there's a development bank in Latin America and the Caribbean called CAF, and they've got a new gender mandate. They're doing women-led small businesses and gender bonds. ProMujer itself has gone to the public markets, the bond markets in Argentina, and then they're going out in Bolivia and Nicaragua raising money for, again, small businesses led by women in the public markets, which is a sort of, sign of maturity of the field. Kiva, I think folks might know as a crowd lending site, has found that they're up to 80% of their clients are women, and that's appealing to the investors. It goes on and on. There's smallholder farming credits. There's digital payments for women. There's credit. There's insurance. There's kind of a boom on in both Latin America and women, and when you put them together, you've really got something.
And what about the intersection of gender and climate, and how is that interconnected?
Well, that's something we've been on for a long time then, thanks to a partnership that we have with Heading for Change, which I think folks know is the legacy project of Suzanne Beagle, who was a gender lens pioneer and in the last years of her life also a big champion for climate action. And she had the insight that climate investments were made more effective by having a gender lens. And so there's about 36 funds that we have listed on our site and others that folks might know about that are essentially applying that and trying to make their climate investments more effective by getting closer to women as entrepreneurs, women as beneficiaries or consumers of various things, women as change agents all around.
All right, well, let's take a quick break. When we come back, how Ava Duverney has flipped the traditional Hollywood financing script to bring her film Origin to the screen.
Every day, ImpactAlpha uncovers stories that make a difference to impact investors. I am Zlaima Bibo, Chief Operating Officer at ImpactAlpha, here with a special reminder. Subscribers get the award-winning brief 5 days a week and so much more. Unlock exclusive coverage, get access to subscriber-only calls and Slack channels, plus search hundreds of jobs and internships at the ImpactAlpha Career Hub. What are you waiting for? Subscribe today. Learn more at impactalpha.com/subscribe.
Now, David, I have on my shelf behind me Isabel Wilkerson's 2020 book, Cast, The Origin of Our Discontents. I found the book highly compelling and persuasive, but it didn't strike me as the type of book that would get turned into a big Hollywood movie. So maybe that's one of the reasons why I'm not noted filmmaker Ava Duverney, who was able to get the book turned into the recent film Origin, which was released earlier this year. David, how was Ava able to flip the script on Hollywood and get this film financed?
Well, I was delighted to have the chance to sit down with Ava and also with Ford Foundation's Roy Swan last month. And we have a video interview now up on ImpactAlpha. And she talked about that process. I mean, as you say, it's a hard movie to make because it's about a big idea. And the way she did it, of course, was through chronicling the journey towards writing that book, Cast, by Isabel Wilkerson. And it's a tour de force of a movie. And what she told me in our interview was that she wouldn't have been able to get it made, or certainly not in the way that it's come out, in the traditional Hollywood structure. So she pulled together a kind of investor syndicate of mission-driven investors and some foundations to sort of make it outside of the studio system.
Can you walk us through some of the specifics?
Well, she brought together kind of blended finance, as it were. So there were some loans, there were some equity investments in the movie itself, and there were some grants made. And she's got a nonprofit called Array that handles some of the production aspects, but also kind of the distribution and sort of educational aspects that sort of surround the film. So she's got an apparatus now to be able to do the full gamut from conceiving projects and getting them produced to getting them distributed. And she's brought in mission-driven investors. In addition to the Ford Foundation, which I mentioned, she had Melinda French Gates's Pivotal Ventures. She had Lorraine Powell Jobs' Emerson Collective. She had the NBA star Chris Paul. She had the MacArthur Foundation and many others. I think they raised something like $40 million to make the movie.
Now, Participant Media closed its doors earlier this year. Is this a new model for social purpose films to get financed?
I think so. I mean, there's nothing dramatically new about it, but I think what's new is that the impact investors, as it were, are seeing that they can actually invest in film as an impact investment. And that's not just a grant thing. There's always been documentaries that are supported by foundations. But, big budget and big audience and big impact films are both a narrative change, a storytelling device, obviously, but also can be a decent investment and return the money. So if there's a new awareness that there's a viable economic proposition here, you could imagine that a lot of different kind of movies could get made.
So hopefully we'll get some more social impact movies financed, but at the very least, David, hopefully you'll get to interview more social impact filmmakers.
Well, more celebrities. I would love that. And at the end of the interview, I did put Roy Swan on the spot and asked him whether he was going to fund Ava's next movie. Here's what he said.
I can't imagine not funding something that Ava's going to do. We are investors.
Thank you for the help. I appreciate it.
No, we are investors, so we go through our diligence, but we're engaged in this.
Well, you heard it here on Impact Alpha first. That's going to do it for this week in Impact. Thank you so much for listening. Now, David, what's the best way for people to contact us with feedback?
As always, write to us at podcast@impactalpha.com.
And if you liked what you heard, please subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen, and be sure to share this with a friend or colleague. If you want to help out, be sure to rate us and give us a review on Apple Podcasts. It helps other people learn about the show. This Week in Impact is a production of Impact Alpha and part of the Impact Alpha podcast network. For more exclusive stories about the world of impact investing and sustainable finance, join other agents of impact by subscribing to Impact Alpha. Just go to impactalpha.com/subscribe for full access. Thanks to our producer extraordinaire, Isaac Silk. For David Bank, I'm Brian Walsh, and we'll see you next week for more Impact.